When He has called you to do something, when He is leading and guiding you, there's no safer place to be. It's weird, it wasn't the explosions and the gunfire and the drones that was my biggest concern on the trip. The further and further we went along on the trip, the less and less communication we could have. And that concerned me more than anything. That put me outside of my comfort zone more than anything, was not being able to communicate. Hello, my name is Derek Buchanan. Daniel asked me to speak about my time in Ukraine back in October. I was sent out with our church, Calvary Chapel, Lynchburg. I was a 5-man team, and we were kind of a scouting party. We weren't sure how the ministry that we were teaming up with functioned. We weren't sure about travel arrangements and stuff like that. And so we went out to kind of scope things out so we could help better equip future teams. We also build houses, temporary shelters, and we went with MP3 players that had the Bible on Ukraine on them. And this was a big stretch for me. I've been out of the country before. I'd been on missions trips to foreign countries before, but Ukraine's a war zone. And I knew as soon as I got the email from our missions pastor that they were putting together a team, I knew God was telling me to go. I knew to the point that I couldn't go to sleep that night until I got back up and spent another couple of hours filling out all the applications and getting my passport scanned and sent in and all this stuff. God just wouldn't let me go to sleep until I did it. And I just knew I had to be there. And I'm glad I went. I learned a lot. We flew into Frankfurt, Germany, and then we flew from Frankfurt, Germany to Warsaw, Poland, but there's no air travel into Ukraine. So we had to take a train for 18 hours into Kyiv, Ukraine. And we didn't have a translator, so language barrier was a real thing. It was a lot of kind of charades and pointing and grunting and, just trying to figure things out. We couldn't read signs, anything like that. Things that we thought about it, but not extensively. But the whole time God provided people who could translate for us when we desperately needed them. There was an issue with one of the train tickets and the train conductors didn't speak English. And, God just showed up. It was amazing, all these different places. And one of the young ladies that God used to translate for us was a young lady named Maria. And like so many people in that area, in that region of the world, they've been de-churched because the churches are run by the government. The churches were very corrupt. And Christianity was, kind of a bad thing to them. They claimed Christianity just because their nationality or their heritage, but they didn't know Jesus at all. And she thought we were paid to come in and do the jobs that we were doing. We were talking to her on the train, and she didn't realize that we were just there because Jesus told us to go there. That Jesus told us to go there and show love. And I think that changed her perspective on Christ. I think that changed her perspective on Christianity. And I hope that it brought her back into the fold. But we got to meet a lot of people like that. I said the language barrier was difficult. We had a little bit of translation here and there. But there were a lot of people who knew the religion but didn't know the relationship. And they didn't have opportunity to see Jesus face to face, I guess you could say. And I think we made, even though we were there for a short amount of time, I think we made a little bit of impact with the people that we came into contact with, because as we're talking with them through translators or letting them listen to the MP3 players that are in their language, their faces would just light up. They would get these huge smiles on their faces, and they would just sit and listen and listen. They craved it so much. And that's something I've seen in other places too. You know, we get outside of the United States where, you know, things are completely different. And people just crave those relationships with Christ in a lot of ways. I've seen it in Honduras, in Ukraine. My wife saw it when she was in the Republic of Georgia last summer. That's what's brought us into the missions field. That's what is turned our heart towards going on missions. Is there are so many people out there who just crave that word, God's word, who just want to know more and more about it. I encourage people who, whether they feel like they can or not, whether they feel like they are able or not, whether they feel like they're qualified or not, pray about it. God can use anybody that is willing to obey and willing to go and willing to seek out these people that need to have that relationship with Him, that want to have that relationship with Him. And it doesn't have to be overseas. It can be right in your own neighborhood. But that's something that God has called us to do, and I feel very strongly about that. Is we are to spread the gospel. We are to preach the good news to all nations, all people. You know, I understand it's scary at times. I used to be afraid to talk to people about Jesus, and sometimes I still am. But it's what we're supposed to do, and it's the least we could do. For all that has been done for us, it's the least we could do. The building process it's a system that I'd never seen before. None of us had, and we had one who was a professional contractor with us. It was quite ingenious for temporary housing. They sandwiched styrofoam in between two pieces of OSB plywood, basically, and it was an interlocking system. You could just lock these different size panels together to make whatever shape you needed them in. And the structures that we were building were small. They were just meant to be temporary to get them through the winter until more building could be done. It was basically a 16-foot by 8-foot building that had a small bathroom, that had a shower and a toilet and a sink in it, and a door and a window. But, you know, it was well insulated. They would have wood stoves in them, and they were meant to last a little while. Like I said, I wouldn't want to live in it for very long, but when everything's been destroyed, when your house is completely leveled, it's better than sleeping outside. And the winters get kind of rough there. And it was weird because we were staying just west of Kyiv in a village called Makariv, and it was one of the hardest hit areas for, I don't know the reason why, but it was a strategic point when Russia invaded from Belarus. They fought very hard to take Makariv back in March, and they held it for a month before the Ukrainians finally got it back. But you're driving down the road and you see these beautiful houses and buildings, and you know, it's normal, then completely destroyed, leveled down to the foundation, then normal, completely destroyed. It seemed at random. But there was a lot of heartbreak there too. We talked with a family who had asked that the house that was being built for them, that the window not face this field we built the houses on their property so we could tie into their existing utilities and septic tank and stuff. We would just, you know, build it in the yard, what used to be the yard and everything. But this one family had asked that the window not face the field behind them, because that's where almost everybody in their village was lined up and massacred. And they didn't want to stare at that field every time they looked out the window. We met a gentleman drawing a blank on his name right now. Older gentleman, probably 70s or 80s. And he was outside in his garden. He loved his garden. He was outside in his garden when his house was destroyed. I'm not sure because, again, translation was rough. I think it was by a tank, but his house was completely leveled down to the foundation, and his wife was in it when it happened. And he had scars on his arms from the explosion, the burns from shrapnel. And again, this guy's in his 70s and 80s. And at some point in time, I don't know the timeline. Again, translations were rough, but at some point in time during all this, since March of 2022, he had operated a 30 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. He also was showing us the bullet holes in his little Vespa-style scooter from where he was riding it around, lobbing hand grenades at Russian soldiers while they shot at him. Now, this is the type of people that the Ukrainians are. They're very resilient. And even though he had lost everything, his house, his wife, he was still, you could tell he was very much a peaceful man. The whole time we were working on the temporary housing, he was out working in his garden. He gave us fresh raspberries. He gave us some honey. And he's one of the ones that I couldn't explain to him about the MP3 player that I was trying to give to him, so I just had to stick the earbuds in his ear and push play. And as soon as he heard, the beginning of the New Testament, that's what it was New Testament. As soon as he heard it start up in his native tongue, he just grinned from ear to ear, and he just squatted down right there next to his raspberry bushes, and he stayed there for 15-20 minutes just listening. And you could tell that he was a peaceful man, that he didn't want to be in a war. You could tell that he didn't want to fight, that he did not want to operate an anti-aircraft gun or throw hand grenades. But it's what he was forced to do. And we met a lot of people who were heartbroken, a lot of people who, while they'd been through a lot, they were still living their lives normally as best they could. When we'd gone into Kyiv on a Sunday for church with us at a sister church, Calvary Chapel in Kyiv, and after service we asked Pastor Igor if we could go shopping for our wives, because where we were staying there wasn't a whole lot of shopping. We wanted to get our wives a gift before we came home, and he took us to a mall. And this is in downtown Kyiv, where there's drone attacks and missile attacks quite frequently. And there's kids in the roller skating rink. There's people in the restaurants. There's people. It looked like a regular mall anywhere you would go. And we were asking about it. And he said that's how they're coping. They go back to normal as quickly as possible after an attack. Everybody knows what to do when they hear the sirens and the warnings. They've done it I don't even know how many times. But as soon as it's over, they go right back to normal. And that's how they keep going. That's how they just don't get bogged down and buried under all this. We were able to help build a couple of houses. We were only there for 8 days. It was 40 hours of travel in and almost 2 days, a little over 2 days of travel out. And, we didn't expect to get a whole lot done on that short of a trip. Like I said earlier, it was more of a scouting trip to better plan and prepare other teams to go. YWAM was the organization that was heading everything up. And because winter was coming, they were wrapping up the building project shortly after we left anyway, and with hopes to start back up in the spring. And my hope is that we gather enough information that either our church or other churches who are interested will have a good way to plan to go, to plan the travel, to plan the logistics of it, to go back. And my heart is to go back. That's all up to God, though. I don't want to go where he's not leading, and I don't want to not go where he is leading. So, but I hope that we're able to send more teams back to help. There's a lot of help that's needed there. And it's something I noticed that was unusual is everybody we talked to from all the different ministries, we met a few different pastors. It's like most people were covered with, with support financially and supplies. What they needed the most was people. Pastor Igor had, he had these shipping containers full of clothing and food to distribute, but he had nobody to help him distribute the stuff. There's a serious lack of people who are willing to go do the work. And I pray for that. I pray for people to step up, and not just in Ukraine, wherever. There seems to be a lull in people wanting to step out and go get their hands dirty, to go and interact with different people. They're willing to send in a check. They're willing to donate food, but they're not willing to step up to the plate for themselves. Pastor Igor, before this latest invasion started, he had a thriving body there. He, his family, and his entire congregation fled to Western Ukraine when everything started up in Kyiv. His wife and daughter are actually, as far as I know, still in Germany. When we were there at the end of October, he hadn't seen them in over 6 months. He was still in contact with them, via phone and video chat and stuff like that. And he was still ministering to a lot of his congregation who had left the Kyiv area. But he felt called by God to go back to Kyiv. So he started over with a whole new congregation. He's still ministering to a lot of his old congregation via video and phone. But he started up a new congregation, and it's small, but he's got 10 to 15 people that come every Sunday. But he's the pastor, the worship leader, the office manager, the tech team, the food distribution, the clothing distribution. It's just him. He's tired. He's very tired. He did something that he admitted was unusual, but he, a friend of his, Sasha, she's a chaplain for the military, and she's been on the front lines for the most part since 2014. But he allowed her to do the teaching that day because he was just so tired and so worn thin. He did the worship, but she taught the message, and he wasn't going to do anything, but when he found out that we were coming, he agreed to stay and translate. Both of them could speak English very well, but it's easier if you have a second person to translate for you. Sasha was a character. Like I said, she's a chaplain for the military. She's been there since 2014. She gave her life to the Lord at Calvary Chapel, Kyiv, when it first started up, I want to say sometime in the 90s. And she, worked in children's ministry and so on and so forth, and God called her to go be a chaplain. And she's out there on the front lines with all these soldiers, and she treats them like her kids. I mean, she loves them, she helps them, she ministers to them. And in a 6-month period, she'd buried 30 of them. And you could tell it was taking its toll. She was looking very worn, very thin. And like I said, she was asking for people to come and help her minister to the soldiers, just like Igor was asking for people to come and help with the church. We met another pastor who pastors 2 separate churches, one in Makariv and one in Kyiv. And drug and alcohol addiction had become a real problem over there. And he had just finished building a rehab center, one for men and one for women, and they got destroyed. And he's trying to rebuild those. He's had a program set up teaching people to evangelize their families and their neighbors. And he's trying to get that going again, but he doesn't have enough people to do it all. So Calvary Chapel Kiev it's going. Pastor Igor is very tired. They could really use some help. The congregation is enthusiastic. They want to learn. They love learning the word. They love getting together and fellowshipping. Worship was good, even though it was in a different language. I recognized most of the songs. So they're still going. They're pushing through. They're holding on. We got off the train in Kiev that Monday morning, and again, could not speak the language, could not read the signs. We're trying to figure out where to go, where we got off on the platform. We're supposed to be meeting our contact, a young lady named Kata from YWAM, who was coming to pick us up and take us into their base at Makarev. And some people just started yelling, "Go down, go down." So we went down these stairs into this tunnel system that's under the train station. And we'd heard that there was an attack somewhere in Kiev about 20 minutes earlier, but we didn't know where. We didn't know what was going on. And we're sitting down there in this tunnel and we're waiting. We can't really talk to anybody because nobody knows. We can't understand each other. And finally we get in touch with Kata, and she says that she's just a few minutes out, and she tells us where to meet her. But we don't know where that is, so we see some people walking down this one tunnel, so we start walking down this tunnel, and we find a stairway that, again, God is so very good. It brings us up right to the exact spot where we needed to meet her. And we're waiting there for a couple of minutes, and it looks like a normal city. It's a fairly decent-sized city, and it looked like business as usual for a Monday morning. And we didn't realize that a block away there was a building that had been hit by a drone strike that was on fire. We saw smoke, but we thought it was fog because of the weather that day. And Kata picks us up, and we're leaving, and literally a drone flies over top of us. There's explosions going on. There's machine gun fire, and she's having a conversation with us as she's worming her way through traffic like it's no big deal. And it was weird because you'd see people running towards the explosions. You'd see people running away from the explosions. You'd see people who were just like, "It's Monday morning, I'm going to work." And it was kind of surreal the way the different reactions to everything were. That's the only time, and we never felt in danger. At least I didn't. I knew God had called me there, so I knew He had ordained anything that may or may not happen to me. So I was never scared, never felt in danger. The only thing that left any kind of lasting effect, and I didn't even realize it till I got home, over there, there's no air travel right now. So when you hear a jet, we learned that if it sounds like it's flying in a straight line, it's probably a missile, and to wait for the explosion. If it sounds like it's doing a circle or zigzagging, then it's probably a fighter jet. And so when we would hear a jet, which wasn't very often, but often enough to notice, we would listen. Is it going in a straight line? When I got home, we got home late one night. I got up the next day, still dealing with jet lag. And jet lag is a real thing. It messes you up. But went outside with my wife, and I heard a jet flying over. And I'm like, "Is it flying straight? Is it flying straight?" And she's like, "What are you doing?" And that happened for 3 or 4 days. I would hear a jet and I'd be like, "Is it flying straight?" So again, not in any real danger. There were missile attacks to power plants that were in our area, rolling blackouts. We saw some pretty crappy things that Russia had done when they lost hold of Makarev. Ukraine is the #1 supplier in sunflower seed oil. So there are these fields that are just hundreds of acres of sunflowers, just sunflowers everywhere. And we're driving by and we see all these fields of sunflowers and they're just rotting. And we see these people in blue uniforms and we asked what they were doing. When the Russian soldiers left, they filled these sunflower fields with landmines so the Ukrainians couldn't harvest. The guys in blue suits were out there looking for landmines. They're using metal detectors, but apparently most of these landmines were made out of plastic. So it's difficult to find them. And a few farmers had tried to harvest, then got blown up. And so, you've got all this, their livelihoods are in these crops and they're all just rotting in the field. So that was kind of rough to see that. That's something we could visualize, not just the physical destruction, but the long-lasting effects on their economy. We went over to build temporary housing, and we did that. Even like I mentioned, we were only there 8 days, but my team were able to work on a couple of separate houses and build one house. We started with the slab was already poured, but we built the house all the way up to where they just had to come and put the metal siding on it and do the interior. We did the complete exterior structure of it, and we did that in 2 days. And that was quote unquote why we went. But the main reason we went was to share the love of Jesus with people. And we were sent with 300 MP3 players. About 100 of them we gave to the different ministries, probably about 150 we gave to the different ministries like Calvary Chapel Kiev, and the different other ministries that we met with. But the other ones we personally handed out. And most of the time we didn't get no for an answer. We were able to give out these things, and like I said before, you'd see their faces light up when they realized what it was. So that was our bigger mission. That was the biggest mission we could have done. And the conversations we were able to have with the people that we could communicate with, we were able to show them that Jesus does love them. We were able to show them that Christianity is not supposed to be corrupt and greedy. It's supposed to be loving and giving and selfless. And they were used to something that was very, very selfish. So, yes, I think we accomplished our mission as a team. I think we accomplished our mission. We can be praying for them to have, the church as a whole in Ukraine is left over from the Soviet Union, which was basically a state-run church. It's Eastern Orthodox, and it's very much works-based. It's very much salvation through nationality, salvation through your family. So we can pray that they see the need to have that relationship, that personal relationship with Jesus, and not just think that they have salvation because they're Ukrainian, or not think that they have salvation because my parents or my grandparents were believers, but to have that personal relationship with Jesus. And they're also told that they don't need to read the Bible on their own, that the ministers and the church leaders will tell them what the Bible says. And that would be definitely a strong secondary prayer, is for God to put it on their hearts to open up their own Bibles and to listen to what God says for himself, not through the filter of man, but what God is saying through his word. Because that's one of the most important tools we have after salvation, to be Christians, to be believers in Christ, to be followers of Christ. It's an instruction manual for everything. So I pray for that personal relationship for them. I pray that God put it on their heart for that need to have a personal relationship with Jesus. And I pray that God put it on their heart to read His Word on their own. When He has called you to do something, when He is leading and guiding you, there's no safer place to be. It's weird. It wasn't the explosions and the gunfire and the drones that was my biggest concern on the trip. The further and further we went along on the trip, the less and less communication we could have. And that concerned me more than anything. That put me outside of my comfort zone more than anything, was not being able to communicate. But when we needed it the most, God put people in our path that could help us with that. So the biggest thing that I took away from it is, if He's called me to do something, I need to just obey and trust. He will take care of the details. I sent out text messages when I first found out about the trip, asking mostly for prayer. And I mentioned that if people wanted to help offset the finances of it, that would be great, but I wanted prayer. And within a week and a half, I had $2,500 donated. I didn't have to pay anything out of pocket for my trip, and we were prepared to. But God blessed us that way. And when He's called you to do something, when He's called me to do something, if I trust and obey, He will take care of everything. I don't need to worry about it at all. Get out there and do the work. Jesus was clear. He said, go and preach the gospel. And yes, some people, they're not able to. They can help in other ways, through prayer, through donations. But there's a lot of people who are more than able to go out and do the work that don't. There's a lot of believers, there's a lot of people who love Jesus who are able to do the work and they don't. So get out there and do the work.